On June 3rd, 1991, investigators from the Costa Mesa, California Police Department pulled up to an abandoned car on the Corona del Mar freeway. They were responding to a call regarding a missing person, Denise Huber, age 23. No one had seen or heard from her for almost 24 hours. And that wasn't like her. Denise's best friend had found her car on the side of the road while searching for her. Investigators examined it closely, but aside from a flat tire, nothing seemed amiss. The only personal article they found was a pair of pantyhose on the front seat. Denise preferred to drive without them. Though nothing in the car tipped investigators about what had happened, Detective Ron Smith concluded that Denise ran into trouble soon after she had pulled off the road.
What struck us as unusual about the scene and concerned us right from the very beginning was that very near to her car there were emergency call boxes, there were pay phones, there were all-night convenience stores, none of which Denise went to call these flyers.
Denise's friends and family put up posters and appeared on news programs begging for information. As the months and years passed, the tips dried up. But police kept Denise's case open and as active as they could.
Every day we would do something with the Denise Huber case. We would review old leads, we'd go over old reports again. We'd look one more time at the photographs. We never gave up, even though we never really had anything good to work with.
After 3 years, no one could tell her grieving family and friends what had happened to her. Denise Huber had simply vanished. Meanwhile, more than 300 miles away in Arizona's Prescott Valley, authorities were grappling with a mystery of their own. On July 9th, 1994, a woman went to buy paint at the home of a man she met at a swap meet. While she waited for him, she noticed the padlocked rental truck and the paint and chemical cans cluttering his yard. She thought they looked out of place for such a respectable neighborhood and wondered if any laws were being broken. Suspicious, she called a friend who worked for the police. Her friend thought it sounded like a clandestine drug lab, which police find in the most unlikely spots. He sent investigators from the Yavapai County Sheriff's Department to check it out. The rental truck with the California tags looked like it hadn't been moved in months. The electrical cord snaking out of it and the paint cans all around reinforced the notion that this might be a mobile drug lab. A check of the tag showed the truck had been stolen. Armed with a warrant, police cautiously opened the cargo door. Inside was a freezer.
Ready, guys? We're opening up.
Not knowing what it might contain, they suited up in protective gear. Plastic bags obscured the contents, but at the bottom of the freezer lay a pool of frozen blood. Carefully moving the bags aside, the officers expected to find nothing more than a deer. Instead, Lieutenant Scott Masher uncovered a horrific mystery.
Initially, when we opened the black bags and could tell that we had a human, a frozen body with handcuffs behind the back, ice crystals, it was grim.
The homeowner still hadn't returned, so police ran the license plates on the white pickup, also parked in the driveway. The owner was identified as John Joseph Famolaro, Within an hour, Famolaro and his mother pulled up to the house. Sheriff's deputies took Famolaro into custody, charging him with stealing the rental truck. They were anxious to find out more about the body in the freezer. At the police station, Famolaro was polite but uncooperative. He refused to answer any questions and asked to see his lawyer. Without any assistance from their suspect, investigators would have to rely on physical evidence at the scene to identify the body in the freezer and to find out how it got there. They charged Famolaro with homicide. The next day, warrant in hand, investigators entered Famolaro's house, hoping to find information about the victim in the freezer. In its frozen condition, they couldn't even discern the victim's gender.
Look through these things on the chair.
Famolaro's house was crammed with his belongings. This was the home of a man who never threw anything away. If clues were here, they'd be difficult to find. After more than 2 weeks of searching, investigators found several promising clues. The first was a set of handcuff keys that matched the cuffs on the victim.
Bag it and tag it. Okay.
The next clue took investigators by surprise. 2 complete Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department uniforms. In the garage, the deputies found 2 boxes marked Christmas, but there was nothing merry about them. Inside, officers found blood-stained women's clothing and a bloody hammer and nail puller. They also found a pair of women's shoes, the backs badly scuffed, as though the woman who wore them was dragged.
Get a couple of bags here. Shot of this hammer.
And that wasn't all.
One for
We did locate numerous female identifications. That included Social Security cards, I believe some driver's license, and other identification, obviously raising the concern of maybe we had additional victims.
Yavapai County Police had to face the very real possibility that John Famolaro was a serial killer. Arizona investigators looking into a murder had every reason to believe that there may be more than one victim. To test that theory, investigators brought in cadaver dogs to locate more bodies on John Famolaro's property. The dogs, trained to detect the slightest whiff of decay, alerted their handlers several times. Officers dug up every spot and still found nothing. But they never completely gave up the suspicion that the killer had struck before.
I just got that paperwork from Costa Mesa
Police followed up on every piece of ID found in the Christmas boxes. Much to their relief, they found that each woman was alive and accounted for, except one from Costa Mesa, California. Her name was Denise Huber. To confirm her ID, Yavapai County forensic technician Mike Winnie lifted a thumbprint from the thawing victim and compared it with the one printed on Denise Huber's California driver's license. The prints matched, identifying Huber as the victim. To authorities in Arizona, the name meant nothing. But to Costa Mesa detective Ron Smith, it was the news he had waited 3 anxious years to hear.
The call I received from Lieutenant Scott Masher from Yavapai County was that he thought maybe he had a body identified as Denise Huber and asked us if we were familiar with Denise Huber. Well, of course, I almost fell out of my chair when he mentioned the name.
Now that she had been found, in frozen and decomposed remains presented a unique set of challenges to Maricopa County Medical Examiner Ann Buchholz.
In our environment, to examine a frozen body is very unusual. We deal 99% of the time with people who have been exposed to heat elements, and that is more our area of expertise than someone who has been in a cold environment. It took the body approximately 2 days to thaw, where we could actually perform the internal examination.
On Friday, July 16, 1994, Yavapai detective Scott Masher and Costa Mesa detective Ron Smith, along with other officers, gathered in the medical examiner's lab to observe the autopsy. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the skull, resulting in multiple fractures. To identify the murder weapon, investigators needed to evaluate the entire skull to see where and how the blows had been struck. They called in forensic anthropologist Laura Fulginiti.
How many days are we looking at here?
Reconstructing a person's skull is very similar to doing a jigsaw puzzle. Essentially, you have about 50 pieces and you need to put them back into what you know to be the right composition.
It took Fulginiti 2 days to reconstruct the skull, never losing sight of the fact that this victim was once a person.
And I remember standing in this very room thinking to myself, how did you come to be in my sphere? This is not right. It's not natural for you to be here.
She determined that the victim had sustained more than 35 blows to the head. The wounds were consistent with the hammer and nail puller pulled from the box in Familaro's garage. To be certain, the lab ran tests. Technicians were able to establish a DNA profile from the blood residue on the nail puller. It matched the DNA profile taken of the victim's own blood. The match confirmed that they had found the murder weapon. To build their case, investigators had to retrace the events that led from the victim's abandoned car on a California freeway to John Familaro's freezer in Arizona.
Covered initially as far as the search warrants at this point in time.
It was very important for both agencies, the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office and the Costa Mesa Police Department, to work together and piece the evidence from California and Arizona to one case, one solid case, in order to successfully prosecute this.
The Costa Mesa Police Department gathered information on Familaro's activities during the time he lived in California. They learned that he had attended the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department Reserve Academy, but he couldn't make the grade and dropped out after just a few weeks. He kept his uniforms, which police found at his house. Further investigation led detectives to a warehouse in Laguna Hills, 12 miles from where Denise Huber's empty car was found. John Familaro had stored some paint and supplies in the warehouse, then moved everything out when he left the area in August 1992, 13 months after Denise Huber vanished. Investigators thought it was likely that Familaro had committed the murder here. They hoped to recover forensic evidence that would tie the killer to the crime and determine where the killer's trial would take place. Police searched the unit for evidence of the crime, using luminol to expose traces of blood. Applied to a surface and viewed under an alternate light source, luminol reveals blood stains invisible to the naked eye, even traces left years earlier.
We found that the warehouse was huge, but I wanted every square inch luminol for blood. Almost the very last bottle in the very last corner that we looked, we sprayed luminol into the corner against the wall. And all of a sudden, the luminol just lit up. This bright glow showed us we found what we were looking for.
Technicians compared this blood to a sample taken from the victim in Arizona. They matched. The forensic analysis gave Detective Smith of the Costa Mesa Police the proof he needed to make the case.
The forensic science in testing the blood was absolutely critical. Number one, it established that the crime occurred in California, and that established jurisdiction. It also positively identified that blood as Denise. It put Denise at that scene.
Famularo never confessed. The forensic evidence spoke for him. The investigators had successfully matched the blood in the California storage unit to the victim in Arizona. And that placed the victim within deadly proximity of John Famularo. Authorities believe that Huber pulled off the road with a flat tire. Spotting his prey, John Famularo approached under the guise of lending a helping hand. He abducted Denise Huber in Costa Mesa, California, in the early morning of June 3, 1991. Famularo murdered her sometime later, hid her body in a freezer, trucked it to Arizona, and kept it until police discovered his crime 3 years later. John Famularo was sentenced to death. He awaits